Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amanda and I'm a psychiatric survivor. I'm an aspiring health coach. I want to make it my mission in life to help people get off and stay off psychiatric medications. Um, I'm going to dive into the topic at hand. I'm making a series of videos on my deconverting from evangelical Christianity and coming off of religion and coming off of spirituality in general. Um, so I hope you find that you can relate to this if these topics have been kind of burdensome for you. This is a particularly emotional month around these topics for me because it's October, and October is when my boyfriend and I basically make a high holiday out of horror movies. We love horror movies. We belong to a horror movie club, and his tradition is to watch a horror movie every day in October. I am more into paranormal documentaries like haunting and channels with captured footage of ghosts and things like that. I've been actually also seeing a lot of interviews with exorcists come up in my YouTube feed, so that's given me something to chew on. Um, and so I still miss Jesus. I still miss my cat. Put her down now over a week ago. I miss church very much, and today I made the mistake of actually Googling somebody that I grew up with, one of my besties, when I was a little girl, and she's now an Episcopal priest, so oops, this is why I don't have social media. So anyway, and she's gorgeous and seems very happy, and congratulations. However, as I think about my upbringing, I kind of get chills that run down my spine. Um, because I ended up in a place after my encounter with a very charismatic New Apostolic Reformation ministry group. You could say I jumped right into the fire and I got burned. So why didn't I just, regroup and go back to a more progressive form of Christianity or, the Episcopalianism of my youth? But once I had seen what I'd seen in the Bible, I couldn't really go and be part of something that didn't take it seriously and seemed to deflect from a lot of the biblical stories that were giving me such fits. So I think it's a process. I think many deconstructors ultimately look for a way to accommodate um, a way to accommodate. They look for a kinder, gentler Christianity, um, and they find that it ultimately becomes an exercise in intellectual dishonesty. And yet some people seem very happy being part of, say, Unitarian Universalism. This morning I was watching a pastor from a Unitarian Universalist church, and I really enjoyed it. I very much enjoyed it. So, I I don't know where I will end up, but right now I'm making a real effort to just abstain from all things spiritual and all things religious and just to take it one day at a time. So let's talk more about the chronology of my coming out of it. So I was going to a ministry led by two people who called themselves apostles. At the ministry, the form of worship was very lively and very charismatic. It involved a lot of singing, being slain in the spirit, speaking in tongues, faith healing. I enjoyed it. It was a small enough group. We were not a full size congregation, so there was maybe about 26 people who regularly attended, and the apostles were very much involved in their lives and knew everybody, and so it was a close-knit community. They called each other, they relied upon each other, they knew everybody's problems and struggles, and it could be very claustrophobic and gossipy, but it also was legitimately, you have to take the lumps with the sugar when it comes to community, right? So um I liked them. I valued that about it, although I wasn't particularly keen on really letting the apostles and everyone else into my life. I had this couple that was taking me under their wing. They called me their spiritual daughter, and we were very close, and they knew all about me, and they knew what was going on. So that was enough for me. We would go to the ministry together. They would pick me up. It would take hours, and you would be kind of exhausted afterwards, but you would have this sort of high going on from all of the worship music. I started listening to worship music. And if you had told me in my 20s that that would be me, I would have really doubted you. However, because I feel like that's when you know that you're really gone, is the worship music, because it's pretty bad. And somehow I acquired a taste for it. Like Lauren Daigle and um, for King and Country, Crowder. I loved Crowder. Oh my God, Crowder. So anyway, so what I'm going there on the weekends, and I'm reading my Bible that I've gotten from the couple. It's like the New Living Translation. I'm not sure exactly what translation it was, but it was a very the language of it was very modern and colloquial and clear, and I liked it. And I was also um, trying to be a super Christian and read my Bible. I was going to do this thing, okay? Um, and the first crack came with the book of Ezekiel. Everybody wants to know, for a deconstructor, I always want to know, like, what was the first crack? That's so interesting to me. So many people have so many different stories about what that one thing was that once it was pulled on, it became the thread, and the sweater started to unravel. Sweater of faith. For myself, it was reading the book of Ezekiel the same time that I was taking in a lot of content about narcissists, narcissistic abuse syndrome, and so those kinds of pop psychology um, videos were all over my feed at the time, and I was also trying to be extra, and I discovered Christian YouTube. So I was watching people like Melissa Doherty, Stephen Bancarts, and Doreen Virtue. And they're important because this whole thing that I'm attempting to do this series on is about the New Age to Jesus pipeline. Okay. So my last video, I discussed a particular psychological type that I see going on that is reflected in myself and my story, of the types of people who are swinging. The pendulum swings very hard from New Age occult practices to evangelical Christianity. Okay, so what happened? So I was reading the book of Ezekiel, and I couldn't read it with the apologist goggles anymore. It's fairly late in the ethno-nationalist history of the Israelites that the Old Testament is. And they've been conquered by the Babylonians, and Ezekiel is part of this sort of refugee camp. And of course, they've been conquered again and again because they're such, such a bad, whoring, idolatrous, despicable, disappointing, perpetually disloyal group of people that God has to bless and favor them with land and conquest when they're doing well, but then they backslide and God lets other people come and conquer them, to chasten them. And so their fortunes are in direct proportion to their obedience to the one true God, Jehovah. Okay, so somehow, and looking back on it now, I'm like, how did I get this far? Why was the first crap Ezekiel? And that's pretty damn late in the story. And I don't know what it was. I think it was the translation maybe might have done this because it was making things like very clear, like very, yep, okay, am I reading this right? I mean, there's no mistaking it. So the first part of Ezekiel, if you haven't read it, is this really freaky deaky ancient aliens type intro with God appearing to Ezekiel while he's sitting by like a river, and God is going to come and tell him, guess what you're going to do for me? You're going to go back. You're going to tell them to get their shit together, because if they don't, here's what's going to happen. Bad shit, bad shit, and bad shit. Okay. And, so it's really weird. The first part describes God coming down in this vehicle type thing, and it's very, very ancient aliens. I mean, I read it again in preparation for this video, and I was like, wow, oh my God, that sounds spaceshipy. And then and there's like wings and a cherub and anyway. So then you get past that, which is not offensive. It's not offensive, okay? I find the Bible morally offensive. I do. I find it morally outrageous. Stomach turning. I highly disapprove. I do. I'm sorry. So anyway, I'm reading this, and then God develops a relationship with Ezekiel in preparation for Ezekiel going back to this remnant of Israelites to warn them and to tell them how exactly God wants them to get their shit together. But Ezekiel has to be made into a prophet. He has to be made to understand God's exact message. And God enacts a series of demands on Ezekiel that, as I was reading it, I couldn't get out of my head that it was torture. It literally sounded like torture. So, and there was this weird negotiation that Ezekiel had with God. God wanted him to eat bread that was baked over shit, burning shit, human shit. And Ezekiel was like, well, God, see, we don't do that. It's not, you didn't have the word like sanity, but humans don't do that. And God was like, well, you can just use cow shit. So God makes him do all kinds of things. He makes him build this little torture rack device, which I later realized he wasn't just doing this out of a sadistic, psychopathic urge to turn Ezekiel into a worthy prophet. But supposedly this was all street theater that Ezekiel had to do, and he had to enact the great suffering that, but it's really sick shit. I mean, it's sick. It's Ezekiel can't eat for 40 days. He has to lie on his side. The bread, the burning ember of shit. Like, baking your food with excrement. It's really nasty. And then later in the book, God is comparing the idolatrous people to a cheating female spouse, or and the language gets very, very hair-raisingly misogynistic. Whore, I mean, and and you can say, well, that is a work of its time. And this is the great, great, great game that apologists play. I have no response to someone who says you cannot judge the work based on your 21st century mores. I just don't know what to say about that, because the work is being presented as the touchstone for all morality for all of the world. This is where we're supposed to get our framework. And I am aware that there's a second chapter to the book called the New Testament, where people don't necessarily require prophets to do all this crazy torture stuff, but to themselves. But that is the issue. That is one of the many, many issues that I have. So for whatever reason, I was shocked by how rude, psychopathic, sadistic, and just weird. Just weird. Like, I mean, Buffalo Bill at the top of the just fucking weird God is in this book. It's weird. I cannot, and so that was the first crack, because at that point, I had just been rationalizing and rationalizing and rationalizing and rationalizing every single time. But I couldn't anymore. I don't know why. I just felt for Ezekiel as a person, as a man. And I also was kind of tickled by the fact that that negotiation where Ezekiel offers to have bread baked over cow dung as opposed to human excrement, and it worked with God, kind of put a chink in this sort of hyper idealistic armor that Christians place on their God. Moses does it too. Moses has to twice negotiate with God on behalf of the Israelites because God wants to kill them. Okay, so yes, the Israelites, not their enemies, not slaughter the wicked, wicked, wicked tribes of child sacrificing, horrific. I mean, this is ancient propaganda. Okay, we just had a situation where the vice presidential candidate for our country alleged that Haitian immigrants were eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio, as part of a propaganda strategy that's deployed against the population. I am currently reading Joshua Bowen's The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. I'm in the second volume, and it's driving home what I took from my experience in and out of Christianity, because it's difficult for me to say whether my experiences with the charismatic Christians who are also ultra MAGA, whether the moral sliming that I felt from being around them after a while, knowing how intertwined their faith and their politics had become, and feeling quite threatened, frankly, by Donald Trump and everything that he stood for. I did feel morally slimed, but I did it to myself. No one made me. Okay, so At any rate, I was like, is that social experience what drove me out of Christianity? Or was it really this philosophical turning point that I reached? Because eventually, I would say both happened at the same time. And so I could no longer be comfortable. I had compromised myself and I did it to them. I feel bad to this day, but I kind of lowered myself. I lowered my standards. I wanted to be around them. I wanted to be part of this great big family, but I didn't feel like they were particularly educated, particularly savvy, and they did not share the values, the MAGA values. Okay. And I just kept trying to go along to get along, and I bit my tongue a lot, and I did it to myself, right? I secretly felt like I'm smarter than these people, and I can see past the the gross manipulation and control that they seem to be under. And I did judge them for it. And yet I continued to go along to get along, and I continued to try to abstain and say, well, that's just, that's just their politics, and I can put that in a box, and I love them as people. And eventually I just couldn't do it anymore. I just couldn't do it anymore. So, similarly, I could not apologize for the God of the Old Testament anymore just by saying that he, quote, loves the world so much and loves his people so much that when he called these supposedly disloyal, idol worshiping Israelites, like a whore that spreads. There was a passage in my translation, I can't find it, but I think one of the things that just made me fall out of my chair was that it described God as being angry at them for worshiping idols with bigger phalluses. I can't find it in the one that I have now, but it is wow. I mean, it is wow. I mean, wow. So the supreme ruler of the universe has little dick issues. Okay? And it says that. It says that in the text. I'm not sensationalizing. I'm not exaggerating. Later, I got into Gnosticism because of all this. So, anyway, because it gives a psychological account that makes it all make sense. However, there's not much evidence for any of it. That's the thing. So anyway, then what happened? I started watching videos, while also having kind of more of a PTSD type mania episode. I started having a lot of anxiety. I couldn't figure out why I was having a lot of anxiety, but usually when I am in a state of heightened, um, just excitation and hyper arousal, and like I usually do yoga to help me come back down and feel grounded. And it's actually scientifically proven to have a relaxing effect on the nervous system. Um, and I was watching these Christians that I'd really latched onto because they also hated the law of attraction. And they had really good Christian apologetic arguments for it. But they were also saying things like, you can never do yoga, that's idol worship. It's Hinduism, crystals, Reiki, yoga. Everything was demonic. I mean, every fucking thing was demonic. It would open you up to demons. You were opening portals. You could be, and the mystical Catholics say that you can get possessed by demons that way, and it's just like you have to give these things up. And I was like, well, Really? Because, and then I was reading the text and I was like, no, for real. And it also says that you can't consult with mediums. Divination is wrong. And my explanation for that was God wants you to have a strict relationship with Him and Him alone, or trust your intuition. So I was like, that always made a lot of sense to me why you shouldn't go to mediums and psychics, um, which I have in my life, I will admit, but I didn't really develop like a habit of it. Um, but it made sense to me theologically why God would prohibit that, and also just anything having to do with the spiritual world. So, in my non-Christian friendship circle, I am friends with people who are very open to a lot of different practices. And, for example, I had a conversation with somebody about the gateway process or the gateway experience. If you don't know what this is, look it up. The CIA declassified some documents about out of body experiences that were induced in laboratories uh, through a process developed by a man who discovered that if you meditate in such a way as to balance the right and left hemispheres of your brain, you can have an out of body experience, supposedly, and you can astral project. And there was all kinds of consistency between people's accounts of this, and some people go places, and some people go like to Paris, and some people go to the spirit realm, and it's freaky. Okay, it freaks me out, and it shouldn't, because that's exactly the kind of belief system that I'm trying to give up, the belief in the supernatural. And right now, I'm saying in health and wellness, this is coming up for me again and again and again, because, for instance, psychedelics are another demonized portal to the hell demon popping up. Um, anything shamanic, anything that's from another culture, basically. So there's a consistent pattern in the Old Testament of cultural differentiation of the Israelites against the backdrop of the many different ancient tribes and empires of their area and time. So, I'm tempted to say that this is really popular actually right now on Christian YouTube, not just because New Age is very popular, especially with Gen Z. Um, it appears to have gained momentum and made inroads into that particular demographic that it didn't with the millennials per se. Um, so there's reason to rebut it, but I also think that a lot of what's going on with the Christian YouTube is that the New Age to Jesus pipeline is about really popular hot takes of extreme spiritual viewpoints. And it's a lot easier to just do video after video after video of how something is demonic and tell spooky campfire ghost stories, really, basically, that end with you being saved and embracing Jesus, than it is to actually defend the Bible on its own terms. So the New Age to Jesus pipeline is being supplied by people who are not going to have to defend an indefensible psychopathic overlord God. And if you think that changes with Jesus, hang on, because I have a different theory about that. I don't think it changes with Jesus. So, anyway, that was what's going on with me. And then I started really unpacking narcissistic abuse syndrome and looking at the horrible, horrible history of the Israelites and asking deeper questions. I started to think about all of the statements that God makes towards his people, by extension, the reader, because that's how you're meant by most Christian organizations and denominations to relate to the Bible, which is a horrible way. It's a horrible thing to do. It's so deceitful. It's so dishonest. But I've recently discovered there's this thing called preterism, where people actually attempt to confine scripture to its historical context and also believe that all of the prophecies and everything are already done. Okay. So, at any rate, how was I reading the Bible when I was reading it and interpreting it? So I had this two-track mind about it. I was reading it and attempting to be as literal with it and also as specific with it. So if God really was real and this was the way and this was the inerrant word and this is all really happened, then I wanted to sit down and really read the details of what really happened and honor it the way that it was intended to be written and it was intended about the people that it was written about. Okay, so I didn't have any more of this allegorical lens, but at one and the same time, with the Bible, I believed that somehow this is where the Nar mysticism may have influenced my thinking. I believe that somehow all of the events, all of the people, all of the events in the Bible were always happening simultaneously in time. So depending on so this is the relational crap that I was just talking about. So, like, depending on what your particular circumstance or trial or challenge is, you may be in the Garden of Eden, being one of the characters emotionally and spiritually, right? Or you may be later in a different circumstance, a different time. You may be at the like Last Supper, or you might be, so this is where how you are trained and conditioned actually as a Christian to read the Bible. Like, are you a Miriam? Are you a Mary? Are you more of an INFJ or more of an, like Myers Briggs this shit? No, you're not. You're not. It's okay. So anyway, I don't like it. I don't like it. Melissa Doherty has a very funny satirical video about Bible study where people are like, like, I'm facing some Goliaths in my life. And yeah, no, you're not. You're not David and you're not Mary and you're not, so I just felt like that kind of thing was inadequate and I was really blowing it up in my mind. Like I was getting really mystical with it. Looking for signs and thinking. And this was part of why I ultimately was like, I don't think that this is helping my mental health. And not that that was a reason to quit, but it was becoming peculiar. I was becoming peculiar. Okay. So, and you don't really want to be like that, especially if you're prone to mania, because your mind goes into hyperdrive and you start making connections out of things that may or may not be actually connected, because that's the mode that your mind is in, and endowing it with significance. And, you can really quickly spin up into religious psychosis. So, anyway, I was thinking that I used to make these charts. I would compare when I was coming out of it the New Age operating assumptions as a spiritual paradigm versus Jesus. And that was really, really helpful to me, because I would make myself do it without choosing. I just really wanted to understand what were the assumptions on offer and then say, I may not make up my mind today, but at least I have analyzed it. At least I have more of at least I see the choices. And ultimately, I didn't favor one over the other. It became something that I'm pretty neutral about. Um, but at any rate, I made it very clear to me that there are some very stark differences. For instance, the New Age is works based. Jesus saves you by grace alone. So, New Age is more about enlightenment, and you have to constantly try to elevate your consciousness and reform your character and empty your mind and meditate and do your yoga and your what have you, and eventually you may have a special experience that makes you see things differently than other people. And in Jesus, you have somebody who says, "No, I'm gonna do that. That's my job." So salvation is a very different goal than enlightenment. And many of the people in the New Age to Jesus pipeline aptly point out that this enlightenment works based philosophy makes you ultra self centered. It makes yourself the center of the universe. And then it makes you exhausted because you are chasing a mirage. There's always something else you need to do. There's always some other way you need to refine yourself. There's always another meditation. There's always another ayahuasca trip. There's always an insight that you don't have. There's always as a different spiritual tradition that you haven't been informed of. There's always a technique you don't know. And most of these people, I think, the people who made a really great killing out of seducing the baby boomer generation, people like Osho, all these gurus pouring in. I mean, it's a study in cult formation and group dynamics and ultimately con artistry. I think it's mostly con artistry. I do. Although I also think that the works-based meditation, I like yoga. I will probably continue to do yoga. I've always thought of it as good exercise, and I like the benefits to my nervous system. So the New Age offers, one of the YouTubers that I watched, Melissa Doherty, just comes out and says it quite plainly. She says it offers you power for your soul. So you're selling your soul, and often there is this expectation that you'll have superpowers. You'll become psychic, for instance. Jesus offers you your soul for all of your power. Okay. So it's a surrender, subservient, slave, obedience, grace alone paradigm. But both of them have concepts about purity, spiritual contamination, rather than trying to be divine because you have a quote divine spark in you. That's according to the New Age. You can become one with God. In Christianity, you cultivate a relationship with God through Jesus, but ain't no way. You're not even. No, no. Now, I think it's important to point out that there are some similarities. So, New Age beliefs tend to percolate. This concept percolates throughout karma. So there's a just and orderly nature to the world. I think that Christianity also offers a just, orderly vision of the world. Okay. Also, yeah, I just want to say that there's a lot of truth to the idea that the new age, if you get too into it, can make you kind of narcissistic. You can believe that you're special and you're better. But also, I think there's a sort of inverted narcissism going on with Christians. Yeah, this concept of being saved, and yeah, a lot of people have trouble with the idea that you're just gonna go to hell if you don't believe, or people who don't believe go to hell. And hmm, I wanted to learn the Bible again because I also had a suspicion that a lot of Christian doctrine wasn't in the Bible, which is true. It used to irritate me as a Christian um, when people in congregations would speak of their dead relatives as having gone to heaven. Um, because as far as I could remember, I remember saying the Nicene Creed growing up. He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. Okay, and so I was like, and then I knew too that there wasn't much of a basis for belief in heaven or hell and the dead in the Old Testament because Jews don't really believe that there's an afterlife like that. And hell appears to be a place where Satan was consigned to. So I don't know. This idea that people are going to go to hell, um, and that people we like are in heaven when they leave us, I just I was flabbergasted at how childish and quaint and naive other Christians could be because that's not what the Bible says. And so, I had this conflict in myself. I wanted to belong to a church where it was like, no, I wanted to be a Bible thumper because I want to be like, I can literally, okay, I can accept. I actually felt like being a fundamentalist in the sense that I could believe in the Bible as the literal, inerrant word of God protected me in a way from falling prey to church wolves. How do I mean that? I believed that if I accepted that scripture was perfect and the word of God, and I could access it for myself. So I didn't have to worry about if people at my church are getting really worked up about things and pressuring me to also get worked up about things. So I thought it would protect me in a way from adopting attitudes that had kept me away from Christianity. Frankly, the nonsense and the hoopla with the politics and the judgment and the conservatism, frankly. So, I wanted to know that these people were just off on their own thing when the Bible says this, for instance. So I believed that I could be a purer, better Christian than the Christians that I secretly disapproved of. And that was on me. Okay. Because I can't, because the Bible is horrible. The God of the Bible is horrible. And I think that the New Testament is a con job. I really do. I also think Jesus probably never existed and is a composite figure who was created out of a political agenda that the Romans had against the Jews, potentially. Or there's another scholar that this is so crazy because it's the exact opposite, but he thinks that Paul created Pauline Christianity and the gospel writers created it basically because they were Jews who wanted to undermine the Roman Empire from within. So it's either the Romans created it to undermine the Jews or the Jews created it to undermine the Romans. I don't care. I don't think that they are first-hand accounts And I think that Jesus is a composite figure based on other people who at that time were Jewish mystical radical revolutionaries because of the social conflicts of the age. I read the New Testament hoping to be rescued from the psychopath, sadist, narcissist of the Old Testament. And I wasn't ultimately. And I'll tell you more about that. But first, I want to just drive home some points. I feel that there are a lot of people who will listen to my testimony and they will say, you just feel this way because you have these bad formative experiences in your childhood and you don't know how to see things now. So, in other words, I'm an abuse victim, so I'm damaged, so my viewpoint's invalid. I will grant you that there have been many situations in my life that I have been unable to be objective about. I have had, as a result of the abuse that I endured as a child, a lot of cognitive distortions that I've had to unlearn and deconstruct. However, I take issue with the idea that my subjective lens is less valid than someone who had a more neurotypical type childhood. So, one of the cognitive distortions that people like me commonly end up in that hurts us a lot is the idea that the world is a very dark place, that it is fundamentally evil, and most people are going to hurt you or be bad or let you down. Then people just do really bad things to each other. That's just their nature. So, this overly pessimistic, dire, bitter view of humanity and of the world as a hostile, threatening place is really common in people who have had severe trauma or abuse, or not, maybe not even that severe, okay? But is in particular, it can become the worldview of somebody who had sustained experiences as a child with violent, arbitrary adults, or someone who was just neglected and didn't feel loved, or someone who was bullied, etc., etc. Okay, so this idea is a distortion. It is an exaggeration. It is not the case that we live in a really dark world. I believe the world contains more or less the same amount of light and the same amount of darkness that it always has, and that human society does change, but somehow I believe there is a balance. That's like in Zoroastrianism, Taoism, too. My belief is that we're not really changing a lot through social progress, that there will always be good and evil in the world in set amounts, okay? But I would caution you from listening to what I'm about to say and throwing it out because I don't know how things really work because my parents were not normal. Okay. The idea that your experience is more valid because it made you neurotypical versus someone else's. If somebody who has been abused tells you the world is a dark place, you should listen to them. You should accept that that is their literal truth. They lived it, okay? So when I talk about my encounters with people that I read about in the Bible and the God of the Old Testament, and I relate that to experiences that I've had, I'm not trying to trivialize or shrink God down, but I'm saying that Christian apologists play this grand game of getting people to overlook the absolutely clear as day message in the text and the stories and the dynamic, because they know that the character of God as a person is unsuitable and unacceptable. And it reminds me very much of how in dysfunctional families, where there are multiple children, you usually have, among different children, different types of personalities that emerge around the abuse. One is the truth teller. This person usually ends up as a scapegoat and a black sheep, and people talk shit on them, and it is bad. They usually are a fuck up. They may have trouble with all kinds of drugs and delinquency, but they're not going to do what everyone else does. They're not going to sweep it under the rug. They're not going to lie. They're going to call a spade a spade. They're going to say, no, you actually meant what you said. No, you actually did do that. And then other children will step into the role of the peacemaker. And there's a lot of compromise involved in that. And there's a lot of lying. Because they want to love everyone. And they want everyone to love each other. And conflict is anathema to that, they think. And so they end up apologizing and loving whoever is wielding the power more than the truth teller, the black sheep, scapegoat, right? So, in my opinion, we have a traumatized people who are rationalizing the fate of an Iron Age tribe that doesn't necessarily fit in with the others, and that is constantly trying to find a space for itself in the territories that are being overtaken by powerful imperial forces. Okay, so we have people who are traumatized, looking for explanations for their fortune or misfortune. And we have books being written hundreds of years after the fact in the Old Testament, full of prophecy. So, in other words, God prophesies that the Israelites will have a great victory against Tyre. In the book of Ezekiel, it didn't actually happen, but there are plenty of instances where the prophecy was written after the events that it purported to predict took place. Okay, so there's all kinds of dishonesty. There's a sleight of hand going on. But fundamentally, what you're asked to do is what invite all of this into your heart. Make room, make accommodations, sing a new song, make a pathway. Okay, now, one of the things that struck me about the book of Ezekiel, like I said, was Ezekiel's ability to negotiate with God. I didn't think that God would negotiate with a human being. I thought that would be like beneath him, but Moses does it too. So I want to tell you a story about something that happened to me when I was leaving for college. So the night before I was entering college, I had driven with my father. My father drove me and all of my stuff from Texas to Boston. It had been a very tense road trip. We were getting on each other's nerves. He was flustered and hadn't really driven in the Northeast very much, and he was very stressed out and tired. Also, I don't think he had smoked any weed because I was always around, so he never smoked weed in front of me. So he was probably jonesing and pissed off and stressed out, and I was not particularly nice or gracious. And we ended up having a pretty bad fight the night before I was supposed to go to my dorm. And what triggered the fight was that we had not really, up until that point, discussed money. So I had been living in my own apartment and working over that summer. So I had not needed him for money. And then I had quit my job in order to go to college. And you would think that we would have discussed it, what would be the budget. But my dad and I had a strained relationship, and we both, I think, procrastinated difficult discussions. It couldn't be procrastinated anymore. I was in my bed, and he was like up, and I asked him somehow something about books, and how he said, "How much do you think your books will cost?" And somehow we had a miscommunication. And I thought somehow that he was saying that he was going to give me $250 and that it had to last like the whole semester. And I think what he was actually saying was that he would give me $250 for books, but we had not yet settled on some amount for me to have to spend throughout the semester. And that was making me nervous. And then I made the mistake of saying, I don't think that $250 would be enough to get me through the whole semester. And he exploded. He became livid with me. And he was livid because he thought it was insulting that I would think that he would drop me off at college with only $250. And he started screaming at me, "You think I would do that?" And then he hit me. So money was a very, very triggering topic in my family. It was often the source of conflict, and it was often used against me. So my attitude at this time, honestly, all I wanted to was to be on my own so that things like this wouldn't happen. Um, and it was painful for me to ask for money, and yeah, but fundamentally, my great offense that night was not trusting my dad enough, so he hit me. So I'm reading, um at work I get to read on my phone, so I'm reading Joshua Bowen's Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. And I remembered that there were some really strange things that happened when the Israelites were in the wilderness. Um, I had not recalled the extent of it, but God took the Israelites out of Egypt at great moral cost. He killed infants over him. He parted the Red Sea. He slaughtered Pharaoh and his chariots. He elevated Moses after Moses had already murdered someone to a position of leadership. He visited snakes and just the constant pestilence. Excuse me. I have these neighbors. This is a constant. I always wonder, should I call someone about it because they're so awful to the kid. Anyway, so sorry. It's so embarrassing. Okay, so anyway, and you have to roll with it, right? You have to roll with everything that God does to the Egyptians because they are the wicked, bad, evil idol worshippers. I've always thought that Egyptian stuff is creepy. It's just giving me the creeps. I just don't like it. I don't like it. Okay. So it's one thing. It's one thing when you want to have the villain, you want to have the comic book esque Ben Hur, type grand 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston story. Okay. But this is what comes after. And what comes after is a people stranded in the desert without sustenance, eventually without without sustenance and without the social order that they had before. So yeah, they were slaves, but people have aptly pointed out that Moses became an equally difficult taskmaster, and they start grumbling and they start complaining. And you know the story of the golden calf, but you don't know the extent of the abuse of the Israelites by God. You don't know that they endured snakes. Miriam, today I was watching a Christian apologist, and Miriam, Moses' sister, is held up as like an example of a great woman in the Bible. See, it's not all sexist tropes. There were great women in the Bible. And I'm like, Miriam, you mean God gave Miriam leprosy. He gave her leprosy because she was conspiring with Aaron. They clearly didn't know what to do. They were like, we got to get a handle on this. There's mutiny. So there's just all kinds of threat. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what really sealed the case against this God, Jehovah, for me, was knowing that he made a big to-do about delivering them out of captivity because he loved them, and his beloved people should not suffer. They should be rescued from the evil Egyptian overlords. Then he brought them into the desert, and he threatened to kill them twice. And Moses had to talk him down from killing his beloved. That is the pattern of a domestic abuser. I love you so much. I will do anything for you. You don't trust me? That's what you get. Oh, yeah? I love you so much. I'm the only one who could ever love you. No one is going to love you like this. I am the only one and only. And I love you so much I would kill for you. Eventually, the story becomes, I love you so much I would die for you. Okay? But it's really it's a different tactic of the same, just highly toxic source. Okay? Different tactics, same toxic source. Okay? I can't accept a God who is framed as a just, merciful deliverer who threatens to kill his beloved people because they were doing stuff like, for instance, complaining about the food supply. I don't, idolatry, I can kind of get my head around, but threatening to kill. And this is, generations after the flood where there was a covenant so we can trust the God of the rainbow, who repeatedly threatens and repeatedly enacts genocide following this covenant. I can't. I can't. I see too many similarities. My father hit me for not trusting him. If you were to confront him with the illogic of that, he would not know what to say. He would say, he might say, I wouldn't know anymore. He might say that he loves me so much that that's how angry I make him. If he didn't love me that much, you know, he wouldn't have been so angry because he wouldn't have been so insulted. Do you see what I'm getting at? Do you see the pattern? So then the second point that I want to make based on my childhood is that the spiritual warfare rhetoric was very, very common in the NAR circle in which I ran. Okay, so it was very different from the way I was raised in the sense that people were prone to over spiritualize everything in their life, and they will not shut up about Satan. Satan is doing this, Satan is attacking me, Satan wants to attack my family, that's why my children are gay. Satan knows that God put a calling on my heart. Satan gave me a head cold, that's why I can't sing and worship. Satan is trying to prevent me from. And there was some really funky stuff, like prophecies. People were being trained and raised up as prophets. And there was also use of numerology, which was weird. And all kinds of. One time I was walking around town and the couple called me. Patty and Rick called me. And Patty goes on and on and on for about 35 minutes about how, I'm not even kidding you, they had been having problems with their Nissan Murano and were worried about the cost of repairs, but God delivered them from that. There was a recall that was issued, and somehow because of the recall, the warranty kicked in. I don't know, it was some sort of legal ramifications were triggered by the recall, and the repairs ended up being a lot less than they would have otherwise been, so they could get their car fixed for like $250 as opposed to $1,700 or something like that. Well, I had to hear about how this recall situation had been predicted by one of the prophets of the ministry, and the apostles had this scheme, and it was like, and there was all kinds of like numbers involved, and I mean it was elaborate and it was delusional. It was okay? Because I just kept thinking to myself, it's a recall. Like every single Nissan Murano owner, like you could, like this happened to this, but it was a special ordained gift from God in their view. And I was like, I need to leave now. I cannot, I can't. I mean, I can't. I really can't. Another thing that I told them flat out was, look, I don't like this religion that frames everything as God. God is the Father. Y'all know me. You know my dad. You know we got issues. Okay. But what I should have said, a more articulate, mature version of that would have been, I am uncomfortable with the way that in this paradigm, I feel infantilized. I am a grown person. I do not need a new daddy. I don't need a daddy. I don't, and see, this is another point of contrast between the Jesusers and the New Agers, okay? Because the concept of God, at least in other paradigms, tends to be, especially in the Gnostic, more Eastern influenced paradigms, is depersonalized. It's a depersonalized God. And so I always thought that Christians set themselves up for failure because they want to have it both ways. They want a hyper idealized God who, unlike the pagan gods of antiquity, is all good. Some of the pagan gods of antiquity were rapists. Sometimes they raped women and they were still worshipped. The people worshiping them didn't have very high standards, in my opinion, but also were maybe more psychologically realistic in the sense that they worshiped these deities because the deities had power, and it was a strictly transactional relationship. Therefore, the deity did not need to be a hyper idealized representative of all things good, light only, right? Good and light and love only. You can't have it both ways. You can't have a God who is a person who has feelings. And oh boy, does he have feelings. I mean, he has the biggest, baddest, most aggrieved, heartbroken feelings, but hurt. He's the most butthurt deity I've ever known. I haven't explored a lot of the Hindu deities, but I mean, really. And you're like, okay, big, big feelings, big, big personality. In our image, people are walking and talking to him in the Old Testament, like there's a real intimacy there. And then, but we cannot conceive logically and hold in our head. This is just one of many sources of cognitive dissonance that goes hand in hand with being a Christian. I can't conceive of a God who is both deeply personal and resembles humans in his capacity to have emotional reactions to things and a personal agenda. And he's also perfect and good. And because it just it does not go together. Okay, so it's a big problem, okay, for me personally. But when it came to the spiritual warfare talk, I embraced it. It was one of the things that attracted me to. And then it drove me batty, and to the point that I was like, I have to, for my own health and sanity, I have to stop this. And only later, after I had explored Gnosticism, did I say, what really is my problem with spiritual warfare? And I actually came up with like a personal statement of faith, like a personal profession of what, because being a child of divorce, I feel like there was no way for me to listen to all this talk of God and Satan and not get triggered all the way back. Do you know what I mean by getting triggered all the way back? Um, I loved both of my parents, and they hated each other, and they weaponized me, and they took my psyche and they tore it to shreds over and over again. And ultimately, the reason why that hurt me was because I loved them so very much. I did. Now, to hear me talk about my parents, you would think they were dead. They're not dead. But I loved them, and that was the source of the pain. And um, so when I hear people, I am aware that that's really weird to relate spiritual warfare and this constant paradigm of conflict to divorce. Um, but I had a horrible thought the other day because it is horror movie month. Um, I thought, I'm just gonna, this is just something we do. But it's really starting to like spook me out and bother me and stress me out to watch all this stuff because I really wanted spiritual warfare to be true because I thought, okay, well, now all I really have to do is make sure that I do the right things to keep the demons at bay and keep close to God. And the war is real, man. I mean, it's real. And that kind of made me feel like, wow, like there's a lot more important things than am I manic or depressed? Like, what is that compared to like the battle for my soul, the narcissism involved in that, the battle for your soul, right? So I thought I was really fully over it and could watch these things without remembering how frightened I would become that no, really, like what if what if your relationship with God isn't good enough? Or what was even worse was that the people expounding this rhetoric would make these incredibly twisted arguments. For example, that harder you worship God and the closer you are getting to God, the more you might be subject. And all of a sudden, they would over spiritualize a thing that was happening. But I started to become literally paranoid about demons and Satan attacking. So, um, ultimately, when I came out of it by making a series of thought experiments in my head. So I did all of the analysis of the philosophical differences between the New Age and Jesus. And then I deconverted myself by making thought experiments and looking at cognitive bias within myself. So the spiritual warfare rhetoric was crazy making and is the thing that I still have the most trouble with because I don't want to, out of respect for so many people throughout human history, discount the supernatural and be like my boyfriend is a straight up atheist materialist, doesn't believe in it. None of it. Never has. Ghost stories are because people have particular neuroticisms and hangups and they misperceive things, in his opinion. Um, there's no such thing as God. There's no such thing as the devil to him. Um, there's no empirical evidence to support anything like what we see in the movies and documentaries. It's just all, a grand tradition of fallible humans with particular tendencies to be humans and have this imaginative bent that just goes haywire sometimes, right? He has it's just, and I'm like, no, I think we need to give people more of the benefit of the doubt. Okay. But I don't want to dwell on it anymore because it was getting really intense for me. Okay. Because I can suffer sometimes from delusional thinking, psychosis, paranoia, magical thinking. Um, and I don't need it. I don't need that acting like lighter fluid on these small fires that might pop up into my brain from time to time. Okay. So I ended up using thought experiments to arrive at the number one most important fundamental article of personal faith, if you will, for me. Okay. And so a cognitive bias that people have is when they're presented with two opposing camps or thought or two opposing versions of events. Did this person commit the crime? No, he didn't. Is the new age belief in the law of attraction actually scientifically valid? And are we all like minorly divine? And can we, is it, or is Jesus the salvation? And this is which one? I love you and I'm better than your dad and your dad. Just crap. Like, but suppose you get two, okay, 9/11 was an inside job. No, it was committed by terrorists. Okay, so like when you have two competing camps vying for your ears, you decide to spend your time listening and deciding who's telling the truth and who is lying, but you forget that they could both be lying. It's very important. You forget there could be a third perpetrator, or they could both be telling the truth as they know it. Okay? But it's like the parable, like the fable about the six blind men and the elephant, right? So I used thought experiments to de-escalate from my hyper-charismatic Christianity. And I said to myself that just because because I used to tell my friends as an atheist, they would tell me, I don't believe in the devil. And I used to say, well, even when I was like, quote unquote, an atheist, I believed in the devil. I mean, that was part of the whole abuse victim, the world is a dark place. I would tell them, you don't believe in the devil, but that you're missing the point. That's not the important thing. You can tell me you don't believe in the devil, but the devil believes in you. Therefore, you need to be careful, right? I was working my way into it, right? I have not ever let go of my belief in the devil. So what I said was, ultimately, the devil might be real, but that doesn't prove that this God, Jehovah, is good. I know that's the setup. I know that's the intention, but I don't know. I didn't go full bore atheist in the sense that I would read something in the Bible and find it completely cuckoo and contradictory to history or science and then say, the Bible is lying. There's no such thing as God. I can prove it because this is not true about this. I never went atheist in the sense that I was like, probably there's no God. But I started to de-escalate and I used Gnosticism a lot. Because I would say, okay, so let's suppose that there is a spirit entity known as Jehovah, and that spirit entity became attached to these people called the Israelites, and this is their historical account of that relationship. What do I now think? Am I pro Jehovah or anti Jehovah? And guess which one? Okay, so that is how I approached it. I did not I tried to deal with waves of fear, resolute fear coming over me from having these thoughts, but then ultimately decided that it was a moral stance that wouldn't mean much if there wasn't risk involved. And Another thing about reading the Bible is, a lot of people wax eloquent about how beautiful it is and how much comfort they got from, say, Psalms, and how it's eternal and lyrical. And I don't know, I guess New Age or Iron Age poetry just is not my thing, but I always found it really tedious. My opinion about religion is that it is all political. So people call it spiritual because there is a deployment of elevated language, hyperbolic language, and historical symbolic language, but it's ancient propaganda, and it is about political conflicts, and it is about political agendas, and it is inseparable from politics. So if you are choosing to engage with this as the touchstone of your life, what you are doing is misidentifying yourself with an ethnic group that you probably do not belong to, unless you're Jewish. Okay. And by way of Jesus, forming this bridge back to the past, to an ethnic group that you don't belong to, and adopting positions based on ancient political conflicts. So all of it is a political practice. What you're practicing is politics, not religion, not spirituality. So just thought I'd get that out of the way. I believe that about almost all religions. I really do. So I started using a series of questions. So suppose that God is actually Satan. And this is a Gnostic concept, right? I started thinking about demon possession and how these stories are basically propaganda being used to drive us back to the faith and keep us, like sheeps in our pen, and how scary they are and how powerful they are, and how the New Age to Jesus pipeline is about these scary, scary encounters with the dark side, And I thought, we don't know. I mean, I recently explored the apologetics channel Deconstruct and Level Up by this woman named JC Lamont, and I really, really liked her. I mean, I really, really, really enjoyed it. I was like, she's very smart, she's very analytical, everything is laid out, it's fascinating. But she had this whole thing about penal substitution atonement theory and Christus Victor. And, there's just so many contradictions to this God Satan stuff. The word Elohim in Hebrew is plural. There's a whole debate and controversy around that, and the work of Michael Heiser. But one of the things that strikes me is that Satan was originally supposed to be a cherub guarding God's throne. And now I don't know if that's biblical or just Christian tradition, which is a whole other can of worms. I mean, Christians go around saying all kinds of shit that's not biblical, and it's really hard. And it's kind of I'm in an awkward position because I'm like, no, I really want to know what is biblical and what isn't, but I don't even want to be a biblical Christian anymore. So it's weird. I just want to know what came from what, so I'll know. I just want to know. What are the facts, man? Just the facts. But like the other day, I heard the Christian theology professor on YouTube talking about how we know that Satan took 1/3 of the angels with him when he rebelled. No, we don't. But John Milton said that part about 1/3 of the angels, not the Bible. Do y'all know who John Milton is? He was a 16th century poet. He wrote Paradise Lost. So English poets now, I mean, it just goes on and on and on, okay? So much stuff. But at the end of the day, do you believe? I don't know. I don't know that I don't fully, I don't know, I don't fully disbelieve in the supernatural, but I can't be with this God person anymore. I can't be with him. He can't be in my life. He has horrible standard of behavior. that I believe if you understand narcissism and the statements that narcissists make, that they are the grandiose creator of the universe. And if there is any reason to doubt why that might be true, for instance, other gospels that were edited out during the selection process, or merely the fact that the gospels were written decades after the events in which they were supposed to take place by people who wrote in both Greek and not Aramaic. A lot of really dubious history is contained in the New Testament, and it is all fable. It really doesn't hold water. But at the end of the day, where I fall with this is I cannot be a part of spiritual warfare. I had a horrible thought the other day. I was like, why do people even believe this shit anymore? And then I was like, well, once you allow for the existence of immortal beings, i.e., angels and demons, see, they can't die. They cannot die. And this was horrifying to me because all of a sudden then I understood why they would have to use us to, in a war. How would you know if you can't kill anyone who was winning and who was losing? How would victory or defeat be determined when you're dealing with immortal, eternal beings? And now I was like, I don't even want to, oh my God, that makes, oh, that's why they have to use us, right? Okay. Well, not this one, because I refuse to have anything to do with it. That is not my fight. I have no dog in that fight. Okay. I refuse to be part of this fight. In some of the theta healing meditations that I listen to, they talk about there being different realms of experience and realms of existence. And in that cosmology, all the spiritual warfare, the angels and the demons and the Jehovah's and the Elohims and the deities and the Ramas and the Shivas and the Krishna, it just whatever, okay? That is a plane of existence called the fifth realm. But if you try really hard, you can get to the seventh and you don't have to put up with that shit no more. Okay, so that's where I'm going. I'm tired of it. I don't want to hear it. I'm stressed out. It just bothers the shit out of me. But you would think that that has something to do with me. And this gets me to the other like hard line. The profession of faith is the spiritual sovereignty that I take upon myself in myself. Okay? I do not believe Jesus came back from the dead, but even if he did, that has nothing to do with me either. Because the entire doctrine of salvation is pinned to the Garden of Eden and the fall of man. And I learned from being in a toxic, abusive household full of shame and incidents and drunken rages that I do not accept responsibility for things I did not do. Not things I don't remember doing. That's two different things. But I do not accept responsibility for other people's shit. I don't. I wasn't there. Furthermore, we absolutely know from the history of our species that we evolved from primates, that we are at least the seventh of 7 different iterations of Homo type species in this genus, and that we also slaughtered Neanderthals. I didn't know that. Read Sapiens, okay, by Yuval Noah Harari. Okay, so I didn't know all this stuff. I didn't need to know all this stuff, but I sometimes refresh myself to remind myself that none of it is actually true. And if none of it is true, how effing dare you accept responsibility for things that, even if they were true, other people did? And how effing dare you expect me to accept responsibility for things that people did at the beginning of time, people did 10, 15 years ago? I wasn't there. I accept responsibility for things that I have done, but I do not accept this doctrine that says that from being human, just I don't. I don't accept it. I don't believe it's true. I don't have any reason to believe it's true. I don't have any knowledge outside of the Bible that I am spiritually tainted by my very human existence and form. Okay? So that is my problem with Christianity. My problem with New Age spirituality now actually is that I think a lot of it is disrespectful of the body and embodiment itself. And a lot of it is like trying to leave your body, trying to be superhuman and have all kinds of altered state experiences. And I don't think it's good. I think it's better to be grounded in body and to take care of the body. And yeah, so that's a whole other thing that I'm going through now is like how to practice the things I want to practice because I don't like the idea of leaving my body. I don't think it's appropriate. In my spiritual paradigm that I'm creating for myself, I don't like the idea of what I call trafficking. So, bringing entities from another realm here or going as an entity to a realm that I don't belong in. I think there might be outside of Jehovah's agenda, valid reasons for not wanting to do that. I don't know. Still exploring. I'm still working out the details. That's where I fall right now. And I really don't want to be told that Jesus died for my sins. Because I don't accept responsibility for this homicide, this political assassination that has supposedly happened. I don't think it did, but I again, my deeply subjective hot take that people will find way too flip or weird or whatever. My mom tried to commit suicide when I was 16, and she told me that it was my fault. She called me in the midst of a suicide attempt to tell me that she was going to kill herself because I was a quote, nasty, stupid, spoiled little rotten bitch. And I needed to go right then and there and go repair our relationship. So it's hard for me. It's hard for me to take a paradigm where somebody is held up as having died for me or because of me. It's also really bleeding obnoxious that as a Christian, you can ask a handful of people, other Christians, who killed Jesus, whose fault is it that Jesus died, and you will get at least 5 different answers. The Romans, his fellow Jews, God, Satan, us. Do you see where I'm getting at? I think once you have rejected the core of it, and the core of it is deeply twisted, abusive psychological tactics. One, original sin creates a cognitive distortion that you are somehow automatically depraved. The God being hyper idealized has to be balanced with a vision of man as being totally depraved. So there has to be a balance there. Okay, psychologically, this is the construct. These are the things I take issue with. A cognitive distortion based on toxic shame, exaggerated extremes of ideals, total perfection in God's case, total depravity in man's case, not to mention this weird ass Satan character. That's easier to accept. I don't know, because evil is evil. I mean, you know it. You can't be alive and, I mean, unless you've led a really privileged life, or just really shallow and tune a lot out. Okay. So anyway, the cognitive distortions and the abuse tactics. I was involved with somebody for years on end who told me that he loved me, and he loved me so much. He was going to love me more than anybody else could love me. That if I left him, he would kill me because he had a right to. Because divorce was a sin and homicide was a sin, and he would rather commit murder than be divorced. If he had to choose, my leaving would force him to choose between two sins, and that was his rationale. It turned out not to be true. But another thing that he did say to me was that he was the best thing that could ever happen to me, and I was worth nothing, really, if I left him. I was worth something if I remained attached to him as a wife, and but I didn't really have any worth, which is a very confusing thing when you break it down. Because what you're told by a person like that is that you are not worth anything, but they love you anyway. So they're creating a debt of gratitude in you, because once you take on their vision of you as worthless, but then you can't live like that if you crave logic and reason, as we all do, not to mention how insulting it is. I'm not even touching on how insulting it is. I'm talking about the cognitive dissonance points. How can you be sought after and beloved if you have no inherent worth? The God of the Bible does not believe that the people have inherent worth. The worth of the people is in their worship of him. There's no inherent worth. Okay, and we could go toe to toe on this with scripture. Read the accounts of the behavior. I'm not to be won over with glowing language. I'm not falling for it. And that brings me to when I actually read the Old Testament and then entered into the New Testament, looking for Jesus to save me from all of that, and then threw this Gnostic veil on him, like maybe he didn't mean that God, and nobody really knows. I mean, you can go all day with Gnosticism. It's ultimately just as kooky, just as unfounded, just as weird, just as flaky. Just doesn't have a lot of basis. Okay, and you can also see how they had to work in all the. It was the new age of its time. It was like a big old smorgasbord. Oh, you believe that? Okay, some Platonism and Greeks and let's sprinkle in this, and how about this? And yeah, I mean, just weird. It's just weird. And they're not any. I don't think the books of the Bible are well written. Okay, but that aside, I ultimately walked from Jesus because I read the New Testament and all I got was gaslight. Okay, because I felt like so many of Jesus's own statements contradicted other statements that Jesus made often within the same gospel. And it all boiled down to the hyper idealized God. In the Old Testament, one of the horror stories that it's like some of these stories, you feel like you got your eyelashes burned with how, like, okay, that's what I feel like morally. Like, I can't fathom, okay? I can try to place it in historical context, but again, I want to play this circle game of trying to distill something else out of it and hold tight to that. I object as a modern, postmodern, female, American, first world, with my whatever, cultural biases based on the worldly life that I have lived. Morally object. Okay? I can actually do that for now. Knock wood. Okay? Now, in the Old Testament, there's a character named Onan. Onan's brother dies, I think, and Onan marries the widow of his brother, which was customary at the time, and then so that she'll have, a place to go because women had no status, so um, they had no way of sustaining or protecting themselves outside of these kinship bonds. So Onan has sex with his new wife, but I guess it's awkward or weird for him because she was his brother's wife, and rather than coming inside of her, he comes somewhere else. I don't know where he came. I don't know if he came like on her, or I don't know. I don't know if he came like over in the corner. I don't know, but he didn't come inside her, and this was offensive to God because God has this procreation agenda. In case you haven't figured that out, and then God killed Onan. So yeah, God killed Onan for coming somewhere other than the womb of God. And then, as if that's not, I'm like, and the people like this God. This is the same God that people sing love songs to. Same God. Same fucking God is what I'm saying. Same fucking psychopath. Who later became Jesus. Now, how did that happen? Well, just to put that same old subjective taint on my analysis, if you are involved with a narcissist, there will come a crisis point. And then the narcissist will do this thing called hoovering. You have had it. You have walked. You are not taking their calls. You have hardened your heart, you think. And then you allow them back in, and they do this 180 dance, and it is magnificent. It is wonderful. I mean, it's really amazing because now all of a sudden the things that were objectionable, the domineering, the criticism, the snarkiness, the devaluing, everything gets turned on its head. That is what Jesus is to me. Jesus is a very contrived attempt at hoovering the faithful. I don't believe he existed. I read the Bible and I often get a feeling that you might get when you hear somebody making a pitch to you Have you ever been listening to somebody, like somebody you don't know very well, but they really need to persuade you and they need to persuade you urgently? So they will make a lot of qualifying statements like, I would never lie to you. I don't lie. I swear on my grave. I swear to God, I would never lie. I tell the truth. That is what the Pauline texts read like to me. Okay? It's just all too much for me to accept it as truth. It's too much. I don't buy it. And it doesn't make life easier. There's a lot of transcendent value. The transcendent value that drove me to Christianity was giving up on myself and my self centeredness enough to get out of a depression. We have a major problem with this in our culture. We are becoming more self centered. We are becoming horribly solipsistic, competitively so. Narcissism is the root and branch of both the mental health industrial complex and social media and consumerism. And it is cultivated in us to the point of lethality. However, that doesn't make Jehovah just, and that doesn't make Jesus true. So, what I learned from my experience was that there could be other avenues towards healing that were not going to be offered up to me in a therapist's office. And I wish that we could recreate the jolt of spiritual surrender. It's not awakening, it's the surrender that counts. It's the surrender that heals your heart that is broken in depression. And that can only be done through human community. And as yet, I have not found something that offers the kind of healing that I literally received at this ministry. And like I said, it was a beautiful experience that I had to ruin by going to the Bible. Okay. So I don't have any easy solutions. I don't have like a, and then the sun came out. And da, 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 da. I don't have that for you right now today, dear listener. Okay. I just want to share my thoughts. So right now I'm spiritually sovereign. I don't really believe in the supernatural, but I'm agnostic. I'm reading this book, Biocentrism. It is about quantum physics because I noticed that quantum physics was a paradigm that was, I suspect, of being really abused by New Agers online. And I wanted to see if I could figure it out. It's a lot. What I'm getting out of it is that quantum physics seems to support the idea of a God, a supreme creator, or at least a supreme observer. However, it also seems to support the idea of the law of attraction. Okay, I'm at one and the same time in the sense that every bit of consciousness influences subatomic particles through, and that there is a process called entanglement. And the more I learn about, I'm going to read astrophysics text next because some of the stuff that I'm learning about the structure of the universe is mind blowing to me. For a long time, I have taken an attitude. See, another thing since this is that I don't say I believe this or I don't believe that. I'm tending now to make statements like I have a conjecture that, okay. I don't I don't like I don't like how all of this drives people to a point where they feel weak in not knowing something. So I would sit there and berate myself like, you're in your 40s, how can you not know what you believe about stuff? And I'm like, but it's not things that we have a basis for. um, it's just not. It's a choice to be faithful. It's a choice to be a traditionalist if that's the route you go. I can certainly see the psychological benefits to it more so than the new age. But for me, it's okay to say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if there's a God. I don't know if, um, I don't know. I don't know. There's other things I do know. Okay. I know certain statistics about magnesium deficiencies in the American population. Okay. That's me. That's what I know. There's a woman named Dana Lynn Bailey. She's a fitness influencer. That's my idea of enlightenment. Why? Because she seems joyful and excellent at what she does. And I think that's about all that you could really expect from life. Be joyful and excellent at the things that you set your hand to, right? Be joyful, be excellent, be respectful of others, and don't speak outside your scope. So I hope that I haven't done that. But I felt like this was a great catharsis for me, just getting it all out. Okay. Because I gotta go another week or so with the horror movies. So I'll be hanging on tightly to my new practice of conjecture without belief. And I encourage you to just find what you enjoy. Yeah, see you next time.